Greetings, friends. I want to discuss Illuminism in Paul Virilio. This was something I came across in. I've heard him mention this a few times, but I came across it in Art and Fear, which is one of Virilio's books. Um, and he really talks. Well, he talks about two things in that book: art and fear, obviously. But there's an interesting connection he makes between the two of them, and it's kind of pertaining to a Twitter thread, um, of which a big shout out to Transcendor AC, I think, and Humboldt, who were two regular Twitter anons on my profile, and I appreciate you very much for your input, because this is making me think about what the fuck Illuminism actually is. And um, so I'll read the quote, and then maybe I'll just kind of fucking speculate about what it means. So this is from Art and Fear. The atheism of the profanation of modern art to the exclusive advantage of a cult of replacement that has all the characteristics of Illuminism. Not the Illuminism of the encyclopedic revolution, but the Illuminism of multimedia revelation that exterminates all representative reflection in favor of a panic reflex on the part of an individual whose relativism, ethical and aesthetic, suddenly disappears in the face of this virtualism that acts as a surrogate for the actual world of facts and established events. Yeah, so I mean, like, first time you read that, you're gonna go, "What the fuck is he talking about?" Um, but there is you can uh, kind of break it down into little bits and get something out of it, which is what I'm going to try to do here. Bit of background to Virilio. Um, a lot of his work basically obsesses over this transition between um, uh, the standardization of opinion in the kind of 20th century context to the synchronization of emotion in 21st century context. So he thinks that our position we're in, and he was writing all the way from like the 70s until about the early 2000s, or no, about the maybe even 2010. He died in like the 2010s, so he was writing probably up until near his death. So we'll say from this 1970 until like 2010 or something. So this was his period of writing. So he saw this transition happening, with especially with digital technologies and so on. So, but he's also got this discussion of art going on in Art and Fear, and I might do a breakdown of the whole book at some stage. But basically, so he sees this synchronization of emotion, which takes over from the standardization of opinion, as being of the same movement, we could say, of the same processes that also marks the change from like traditional art, or what he calls substantial art, to the kind of multimedia world of representation. So standard art is something where, let's say you're looking at like a 17th century painting. You just sort of look at it, and you go, "Oh, what's that about?" And you kind of think about it, and there would be a sort of reflection and a kind of speculative encounter, we could say, with the piece of art. There would be some uh, sort of not reason necessarily, but it would strike one as being more in line with kind of using reason to think, where the digital era, the world of multimedia, visual representation, it doesn't really have that same sort of distance. It doesn't invoke speculation. I think in one passage he called it mindlessness. There's a sort of mindlessness to it. We're sort of bombarded by it. We're synchronized by it. We're kind of just within it the whole time, and we don't have that sort of reflective relationship to the art piece. It's a sort of mindless titillation, we can nearly say, right? So there's a kind of Adorno styled critique of kind of multimedia as this very vulgar, unthinking phenomena. And I think there's definitely a lot of truth to that, right? But but it goes deeper than that. So let's say like the atheism of the profanation means, I think, the removal of something sacred. To profane something, I think it means to remove something that is sacred within it. So uh, there's something sacred within art which is being, let's say, disintegrated through this media culture that we're in. And that sacredness within art, right? So art is a kind of subjective, like, we do look at art from the point of kind of phenomenological subjectivity. We don't, look at art like we look at something on a test tube or something, right? We look at art with a sort of, with some sort of subjective slant. But through something within art which maybe resembles a truth, our subjectivity, we could say, forms a relationship with, not an empirical truth, but perhaps a moral truth or a wisdom, which is there within the art piece. And I think this is what he's saying. This is what is sacred about traditional art, which is being surpassed. So Illuminism, right? So, and then he distinguishes between Illuminism of the Enlightenment and the Illuminism of the Enlightenment. And I think one of the lads in the thread actually put his question into ChatGPT, which is pretty funny, because that would be kind of an expression of Illuminism itself, right? To ask to ask ChatGPT, what does Paul Virilio mean by Illuminism, is nearly like a kind of like it is like basically Illuminism. But even though ChatGPT gave quite a good answer, it actually gave a rough summary. I mean, a very simple summary. It gave a kind of what Virilio was talking about. And so the Enlightenment, based on values which were seeking to illuminate, to enlighten, right? It means to shed light on, to inquire and to make things more transparent and more clear and so on, were based on certain virtues of freedom and reason. And there's a different sort of Illuminism, the Illuminism of multimedia, which has taken over from that era. And that sort of, again, like, imagine the man looking in front of staring at the art piece and kind of reflecting on what it could mean. That sort of reflective relationship to the art piece has been surpassed by what he calls a panic reflex. And for those of you who will know about Virilio's work, The Administration of Fear, and a lot of his other work, fear as a kind of psychopolitical force is extremely important in all of Virilio's work. So Virilio has this concept about the end of history is the end of geography. He thinks our multimedia is also a form of mass communication, instantaneous communication. And this instantaneous communication basically blurs the kind of spatial boundaries between everything. When 9/11 happened, we were all staring. We were all in New York that day. It doesn't matter what country, even if you were in Iceland or if you were in, Moscow. Like, we were all in New York, because the sort of emotional disposition of the reaction to the event was predominated mainly by a media phenomena. Like, the amount of people that saw that event in real life and understood what it meant in real life were very few compared to the amount of people that saw it through a screen. We no longer have like geographical buffering in between distances. The media merges everything together, and whenever a catastrophe in particular happens, it happens everywhere, right? And not just through information technology, also through like banking systems or pandemics and so on, right? We're so interconnected. But it's not just the movement of money, right, or the movement of a virus he's talking about. It's the movement of information, And this movement of information is an emotional force. Like we don't just we don't just go, oh look, the news is on. We're learning facts about how the like reading a Wikipedia article about the agricultural history of Uganda, right? This wouldn't be a very emotional event. It would be like a very factual event. You, the way in which our information spreads through media is extremely emotive. It synchronizes us emotionally into the event. And it doesn't really matter where the event happens or what relationship we have to the event. Uh, it's everywhere all the time. Um, so you could sort of infer this onto the difference between art. So the art piece in the traditional sense, again, it had some sort of distance and speculation to it, whereas the multimedia representation doesn't allow that distance, and it often sets us into what someone like Hobbes would have called perturbation, which means like something which obstructs reason or interferes with reason. So a panic reflex, right? It's and you have to think about this not just through art, but like through how we perceive everything in our world on a sensory level. So one thing I brought up in my book Notes from the Pod, which is that there's the one time there was a shark attack in Sydney and in Australia, and this guy basically was just killed by a shark like on the beach, and you could see the reaction to people. They started filming it. Like it was just the weirdest response. Like, why would you film this? It's not helping the man in any way. I mean, he was very dead probably, but still, I mean, it's weird to film it. And he sent it to a news station, and it was just like, you see these people, and like their response was not the response you would have gotten 20, 30 years ago, which would have been like, we understand the event that is going on, it's real. How do we address this as real? The event through like the more our perception of the world is being mediated through these sort of screen technologies, the more we don't really know what is real and what it's not. Like, how should we respond? Like, on a factual level, yeah, maybe we know something is real or if it's not, but on a sort of emotional level, on the level of belief, on a kind of phenomenological level, we don't really understand whether or not something's real. So this completely blurs all of our ability to understand if it's justified for us to feel scared of something or not. So it creates a panic reflex, basically, in which we no longer perceive the world with any sort of let's say intuitively accurate reflex. It's purely perturbed. It's purely even pathological, you could say, if you wanted to use like a psychological term. And there's another sort of consequence to this. And so within that old traditional world of some sort of reason and freedom and looking at the art piece with some sort of speculative distance, there was a relativism to it, right? Because it was subjectivity. I mean, like, and this is also the kind of post-human age, right? Because humanism emphasizes subjectivity quite heavily, and post-humanism is kind of the destruction of subjectivity, but it's a specific kind of destruction of it. But we're no longer looking, like, we're no longer able to form, let's say, a subjective experience with art or with nature or whatever, which is subjective from our perception, but at the same time, we can encounter something maybe universal. We can encounter something truthful. We can see an art piece, and we can understand something about like human nature proper. We can read Shakespeare, and we can understand something about the human condition. We can if I experience like physical danger, sure, like there's a subjectivity to it because I'm a human experiencing that, but there's something about life. Maybe I learn something about life, like the meaning of life, the importance of life, like a near-death experience might invoke a sort of existential awakening, and you understand something about life which you didn't understand before, which is universal and true. This sort of subjective relationship, which then allows you to encounter the objective, sort of gets perturbed and sort of gets inhibited, right? Um, and what you get instead is what he says is the virtualism that acts as a surrogate for the actual world of facts and established events. So you basically get handed this sort of dogmatic response mechanisms, which I would say don't allow a subject and a phenomena, let's say, to form a sort of truthful or authentic relationship with one each other. We're not allowed to make judgments anymore. We get handed like our relationship, our subjective relationship to the phenomena becomes mediated in a way which basically just replaces that relationship with a surrogate virtualization. And this leads to its own sort of relativism, right? Because the world today is very stuck in its own sort of strange form of relativism. Because I mean, if you think about like the obvious example as usual is is a boy, is a girl, right? Like this is the kind of conversations people have today, which we would have found like 30 years ago, even 20 years ago, I don't know, maybe even 10 years ago, kind of ridiculous. You see, there's this symbolic breakdown in like we don't actually know what's real, and this is surely something to do with our kind of subjective experience of phenomena losing our subjective experience is no longer giving us access to some sort of objectivity and so on. So this leads to its own sort of relativism. It's not the relativism of subjective experience, but it's a sort of techno relativism in which perhaps we can no longer establish. I mean, think again of the American political election, right? It's like, was the election rigged or not? Like people don't agree on this. Like there is sort of no kind of way for us all to encounter the truth of this and accept the truth about it. Think of the way people respond to, Russia hacked our election. Russia did this. Russia did that. Like the wild sort of conspiracies, the wild excuses which the media sort of dishes out and kind of emotionally synchronizes us into. It's almost like we have a sort of like I think he called it a salon of realities to choose from. Like we don't need to come to terms with a very real and objective reality in terms of a factor and event anymore. We can sort of, on one level, we're having our subjective experience mediated by these big monopolized techno infrastructure, but on the other level, this techno infrastructure is sort of giving us a kind of propagandistic form of a reality in which we can sort of pick and choose from. We sort of have a almost like a market of realities, right? So that old human. I'll end it by saying this: like that old human kind of task of speculation, of thinking, of encountering, limited as it might be, being stuck in a human mind, some sort of objective truth, is being kind of replaced by a kind of mediated market of realities. So that's just a few thoughts on that.